All right, number 20 says the average number of reservations are that a vacation resort has at the beginning of each month is shown. So this is that chart. We've got January through August and then the number of reservations at the beginning of each month. Write an equation of a sinusoidal function that models the average number of reservations using x equals 1 to represent January. So we want to create a sinusoidal model. Sinusoidal just means that's that wave that the sine or the cosine makes. So we're looking for either a sine or a cosine function that's going to model this data. So the first thing we want to do is take this data and sketch just a rough plot of that data to kind of look and see what it looks like so that we can determine which function we're going to use. So you can see that it does look like a sinusoidal curve. It's got that wave going on there. And you can also see that we seem to start at our maximum and go down from there. So we're going to want to use cosine. Remember, cosine starts at the maximum and goes down. Sine starts at the midline and goes up from there and then back down. So let's use a cosine function. And our general form is going to be y equals a cosine of bx plus c plus d. All right, so now all we need to do is find a, b, c, and d in order to get our model. So let's start with d. D is the midline, or it's where the midline is going to be. You can see the midline is going to be somewhere in there. And to get that, we can just average the maximum and the minimum. It's going to be halfway between the maximum and the minimum. So let's average those. So D is going to be equal to the maximum, which is 200, plus the minimum, which is 87, divided by 2. That'll give us the average of those two. And that's 143.5. Next, let's find A. A is the amplitude. So the amplitude is equal to this distance, the distance between the maximum and the midline. So there's a few ways that we could find this. We could take the maximum minus the midline, or we could take the midline minus the minimum, or we could take the maximum, 200, minus the minimum. That would give us the difference between those two, and then divide it by 2. In any of those cases, we're going to get 56.5 for our amplitude. All right, so we found D, we found A. Now let's find B. So B is going to determine our period. So let's figure out what the period is. Notice that we're at our maximum here in January, which is month 1, and we reach the maximum again in month 7, July. So the period is 6, 7 minus 1. So the period is 6, and remember we said that the period is equal to 2 pi, which is the period of just a generic cosine function. The period of y equals cosine x would be 2 pi. So we're going to take that period, 2 pi, and divide it by b, and that'll give us the period of our function. So now we can find b. Let's multiply both sides by b, so we get 6b is equal to 2 pi. And then we'll divide both sides by 6, and so we get b is equal to 2 pi over 6, which is pi over 3. So b is going to be pi over 3. That's going to give us our period of 6. All right, finally we have C. And C is going to be our phase shift. Remember, that's our horizontal shift. We're going to shift this thing left or right. And notice here that normally cosine would be at its maximum when x is equal to 0. But here we want our maximum to be where x equals 1. That's where January is. January is month 1, and that's going to be our maximum. So we want to shift this function to the right by 1. And so our phase shift is going to be 1. And so let's note that our phase shift is 1. And remember, phase shift is equal to negative c divided by b, or the absolute value of b. But we're just going to use b for right now. So let's multiply both sides by b, and we get b is equal to negative c. So since b is pi over 3, c is going to be negative pi over 3. And that's gonna give us our shift to the right of 1. All right, so now we can just plug in these numbers. A, we said, was 56.5. B is pi over 3. C is negative pi over 3. And D is 143.5. So that's going to be our answer. That will be the model. And then part B of this question says, figure out how many reservations we can expect in the month of November. So all we have to do there is just plug in 11 for X. And if we plug that into the calculator, as long as we're in radians, we should get an answer of about 115 reservations in November.